Welcome. Tonight, we travel far beyond the edges of time into a story older than empires, deeper than history, a myth carved into the soul of humanity. This is the story of a titan, not of war or conquest, but of compassion, sacrifice, and light. A story of fire. Not the fire that burns, but the fire that awakens. In the silence before civilization, when the world was cold and the gods ruled from distant thrones, there was one who saw something more in humanity, something worth nurturing, something worth protecting, something worth suffering for. This is the story of Prometheus, the one who defied Olympus, not for glory, but for love. As you listen, allow yourself to drift. Let the pace slow. Let your thoughts quiet. Let the flame of this story glow gently in the corners of your mind, guiding you into a deep, peaceful space, one where myth and memory become one. You are safe here. You are not alone. Now close your eyes, take a breath, and let us begin. In the dawn of time, when the world was still young and raw, the heavens were ruled by gods, and the earth was a vast and untamed place. From the swirling mists of chaos came the primordial forces, shaping the first beings into existence. Among them rose the Titans, mighty and ancient, children of Uranus, the sky, and Gaia, the earth. Towering and eternal, they stood as the first rulers of the cosmos. But among these colossal entities, one stood apart, not in strength or wrath, but in thought and spirit. Prometheus. His name, meaning forethought, revealed much about his nature. Unlike his brother Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, Prometheus was a thinker, a visionary. He did not hunger for power as the others did. His gaze was often cast downward, toward the earth, not to conquer it, but to understand it. He saw potential in the raw, chaotic elements below, in the mountains and valleys, the rivers and forests, and eventually in a new form of life that stirred in the clay and dust. Mortals. In the age before humanity as we know it, the earth was home to primitive creatures. They stumbled through the darkness, cold and afraid, their minds dim and instincts crude. They had no fire to warm them, no shelter to protect them, no understanding of the stars above or the earth beneath their feet. But Prometheus watched them closely. Something within them sparked his curiosity. While the gods of Olympus feasted and fought, and the Titans brooded in their mighty fortresses, Prometheus dreamed of what these fragile beings might become. To the gods, mortals were mere playthings, ephemeral, insignificant, but Prometheus saw something more. He saw the glimmer of reason, the stirring of emotion, the seed of consciousness. He believed that, with help, humanity could rise, not to rival the gods, but to find its place in the universe. Yet this belief put him at odds with both Titans and Olympians, for the divine hierarchy had been built on strict order, gods above, mortals below. And to disrupt that order was to invite the fury of Olympus. Still, Prometheus was undeterred. He began to walk among the humans in secret. Taking on a form they could understand, he moved through their primitive villages, watching how they lived. He taught them how to build shelters from branches and stone, how to shape tools from flint, how to follow the stars to find their way. Each lesson he gave lifted them slightly higher, brought them one step closer to understanding. But the greatest gift, the one that would truly ignite their ascent, was still forbidden. Fire. It was the essence of the gods themselves, the glowing breath of the divine forge guarded closely on Olympus by Hephaestus, the smith of the gods. Fire meant power. It meant creation, and with it came knowledge, change, and even rebellion. Zeus, the king of the gods, had decreed that fire would never touch mortal hands, that they would remain dependent, weak, and controllable. But Prometheus could no longer bear to see them suffer in the cold and dark. In his heart burned a compassion rare among the immortals. Not pity, but a kind of fierce love for the potential that dwelled in humankind. So he devised a plan, one that would defy the will of Zeus, but would gift humanity with the light of knowledge and the means to survive. He would steal fire from the gods and deliver it to the earth. On a moonless night, Prometheus ascended to Olympus. He moved through the shadows of the divine palace, past sleeping gods and golden halls, until he reached the sacred hearth of Hephaestus. There, in the heart of the forge, he found the living flame. It danced and roared, alive with ancient power. Prometheus took a hollow fennel stalk and carefully captured the flame within. Then, like a thief in the night, he descended the slopes of Olympus and carried it back to the world of men. When the fire reached the mortals, everything changed. They huddled in wonder as the flames licked upward, casting shadows against cave walls, driving back the darkness. For the first time, they felt warmth in the night. They cooked their food, tempered their tools, hardened their weapons. They sat around the fire and told stories, watched sparks rise like stars, and felt, perhaps for the first time, something divine awaken inside them. They were no longer creatures of mud and instinct. They were becoming human. But the fire did more than warm their bodies. It lit their minds. Thoughts became clearer, questions deeper. They began to wonder about the heavens, about the meaning of their lives, about the beings who watched them from above. And Zeus, high on his throne, saw this awakening with fury, for he knew that Prometheus had broken the law of the gods, and that humanity with fire in hand would never again be the same. Prometheus had crossed a line no other immortal dared approach. He had given mortals the spark of divinity. And though he had done it out of love, his crime would demand punishment of the harshest kind. Zeus, Lord of Olympus, sat brooding upon his throne, lightning crackling faintly in his palm, as his eyes scanned the mortal world below. The fires burned brightly now in the valleys and hills, their orange glow like countless stars scattered across the earth. Humanity no longer stumbled in darkness. And worse still, they had begun to question, to build, to dream, all because of Prometheus. The king of the gods was not merely angry, he was afraid. Afraid that this new light would one day challenge the divine order. And so Zeus summoned the other gods to council. Hephaestus, the smith, who knew his forge had been robbed. Hermes, the cunning messenger, who moved swiftly between worlds. Athena, goddess of wisdom, whose heart felt a quiet sympathy for Prometheus, but whose loyalty to Olympus could not be denied. In great booming words, Zeus declared the crime. Prometheus had not only stolen the sacred flame, he had uplifted a species meant to crawl, not stand. meant to obey, not wonder. The punishment would need to be more than symbolic. It had to be eternal, a warning to all who would dare to defy the will of Olympus. Yet it had to be poetic too, fitting for one who had thought so far ahead. And thus Zeus ordered that Prometheus be seized, bound, and taken to the ends of the earth, to the bleak and wind-torn mountains of the Caucasus. There he would be chained to a jagged rock, far from gods and men. And every day, an eagle, Zeus's own sacred bird, would descend to feast upon his liver. And each night, his body would heal, only for the torment to begin anew with the dawn. Hermes, with sorrow hidden behind his clever eyes, carried out the sentence. He found Prometheus not hiding, but standing tall, watching over a village where firelight danced in children's eyes. Prometheus did not resist. He knew what would come. But he also knew that what he had given could never be taken back. As he was bound in unbreakable chains, fastened by the fire-hardened tools of Hephaestus himself, he did not cry out. Even as the eagle's shadow fell across the rocks, his eyes remained defiant. Pain became his companion, not for days or years, but for centuries. The eagle came without fail, its wings slicing the air, its beak tearing into divine flesh. And still Prometheus endured. He endured because he had hope, not for his own freedom, but for the future of those he had tried to help. He listened to the wind carry the voices of humanity, singing, laughing, grieving, living, and though agony racked his immortal form, he smiled. The gods watched from afar. Some admired his courage, others whispered that Zeus had gone too far. Only a few dared approach the chained titan. One was Oceanus, the old river god, who tried gently to persuade Prometheus to apologize, to beg Zeus for mercy. But Prometheus refused. Another visitor was Io, a mortal woman transformed into a cow and cursed to wander the earth by Hera's jealousy. Her suffering mirrored his, and in their shared torment, a strange comfort grew. He spoke to her of her future, of the distant day when her bloodline would birth a hero, one who would one day free him. For Prometheus had seen far ahead, not just days or years, but ages. His gift of fire was only the beginning. Humanity would stumble, rise, fall, and rise again. They would build cities, forge empires, question the stars, and eventually touch the divine in ways even the gods could not predict. And from the line of Io would come Hercules, to the Romanza, son of Zeus himself, half god and half man, destined to walk the boundary between mortal and divine. As centuries passed, the world changed. The age of Titans faded, and the reign of Olympus solidified. Mortals spread across the continents, guided by the light Prometheus had given them. They named the stars, carved myths into stone, and raised temples to gods both kind and cruel. And somewhere in the high, desolate mountains, the Titan still hung, silent but unbroken, his chains rusted but unyielding, his liver renewed and devoured with tireless rhythm, a cosmic heartbeat of punishment and resolve. Then one day, amidst thunderclouds and the roar of distant battles, a figure approached the mountain. Muscled, weathered, bearing a club and the weight of 12 impossible labors on his back. Hercules, the son of Zeus, born of a mortal woman, his life marked by both divine favor and relentless suffering. He had slain the Nemean lion, captured the Erymanthian boar, cleaned the Augean stables, and now wandered in search of something more than glory, something that would echo across time. When he found Prometheus, he saw not a broken god, but a symbol, a being who had given everything for the sake of others. Without asking, without warning, Hercules raised his bow and fired an arrow of divine craftsmanship into the sky. The eagle screamed as it fell, pierced through the heart, its feathers scattering like ash on the wind. Then, with hands rough from battle, Hercules broke the chains. The mountain trembled as Prometheus stepped free. Weakened, yes, but free. The heavens themselves seemed to pause, as if uncertain how to respond. Some say Zeus allowed the act, moved by pride in his son. Others say he had grown weary of the punishment, of the reminder of his own fear. Whatever the reason, Prometheus was no longer bound. Though he would never again walk among mortals as he once did, he remained forever etched in their stories, their myths, and their memories. And in the glow of every fire, he still watches. With the eagle vanquished and the chains shattered, Prometheus stood amidst the wind-swept cliffs, his gaze once again turning toward the world he had sacrificed so much for. The agony that had plagued him for untold centuries slowly ebbed, replaced by a silence that seemed heavier than the pain had ever been. For so long he had known nothing but torment. Now he was free, yet freedom itself felt unfamiliar, like a forgotten garment from an ancient life. And in that moment of stillness, the air hummed with echoes of time. Hercules stood beside him, silent, not seeking thanks. He, too, carried his own burdens, his own wounds etched into his soul by gods and fate. In that quiet mountain peak, no words passed between them. None were needed. A shared understanding lingered of struggle, of defiance, of redemption. Then, as Hercules turned and vanished into the misty trails, Prometheus was left alone with the vast sky above and the world unfolding below. The earth had changed. The people he once nurtured were no longer fragile shadows creeping through forests. They had become shepherds and warriors, artists and philosophers. They built temples with soaring columns, invented languages that echoed with poetry, sculpted marble gods that resembled the divine. They had not forgotten him. In secret groves and distant mountains, they told his story. The titan who gave them fire, the rebel who defied Olympus not for pride, but for love. Prometheus, though free, did not return to the halls of the gods. Olympus had moved on. The great battles of old were now myths themselves. The Titans were scattered, imprisoned, or forgotten, and the Olympians, though powerful still, found their influence waning as humanity's faith shifted, as new gods emerged, and old truths were questioned. Prometheus chose solitude not in bitterness, but in contemplation. From the high places of the world, he watched the slow unfolding of human destiny, and what he saw filled him with quiet wonder. They discovered writing, captured time in calendars, and mapped the movements of the stars. They questioned their origins, debated truth and illusion, pondered the meaning of justice and the nature of the soul. They created music that soared like wind through mountains, painted visions of worlds within and beyond. And always, behind their progress, Prometheus saw the flame, Not just literal fire, but the fire of thought, of curiosity, of rebellion against limitation. He had planted a seed, and it had taken root. But the path of humanity was not without shadows. The same fire that warmed and enlightened them also forged weapons of war. Temples became fortresses, and wisdom was often twisted into tools of control. Empires rose and fell, each believing it would last forever. And yet through all of it, the glory and the ruin Prometheus did not despair, for he had not gifted them perfection. He had gifted them choice. And choice meant the possibility of growth. Legends of Prometheus spread far beyond Greece. In every culture, echoes of his story appeared in different forms. The one who brings forbidden knowledge, the light bringer cast out for defying divine command. From the Mesopotamian tale of Enki, to the Hebrew story of the serpent in Eden, to the fire thieves in Polynesian myth, across time and space, humanity remembered the figure who defied gods to elevate mortals. Prometheus became more than a titan. He became a symbol for the artist who dares to speak truth in the face of silence, for the scientist who challenges dogma in pursuit of discovery, for the thinker who questions authority, and the rebel who dreams of a better world. He became the spark in every act of resistance, the whisper in the minds of those who dare to imagine more than what is. In the heart of winter, when the fire is low and the stars are hidden by snow-laden clouds, it is said that Prometheus still walks the mountains, not as a god, but as a watcher, a guide. When a child stares into the flickering flame and asks why it dances, or when a question rises in the soul unbidden and fierce, it is Prometheus who listens. And in the distant memory of that terrible rock, that endless suffering beneath eagle wings, he remembers not the pain, but the light that followed. Prometheus, the giver of fire, the first friend of mankind, the spark behind the rise of civilizations. And though gods may fall and empires crumble, as long as thought burns in the mind of even one human soul, he lives on. The story of Prometheus is carved not only in myth, but in the marrow of human imagination. It lingers in the echo of every moment when humanity has chosen to question, to resist, to dream beyond the horizon. As civilizations blossomed and fell, his flame endured not in temples or scrolls, but in ideas. For Prometheus was never simply about fire. He was the embodiment of defiance, of sacrifice, of love offered without expectation of reward. In ancient Athens, where thinkers gathered beneath olive trees to ponder the nature of reality, Prometheus was honored not as a distant titan, but as a kindred spirit. Philosophers like Plato and Aeschylus spoke of him with reverence. In their tragedies and dialogues, he was not a villain nor a fool, but a martyr for thought. Aeschylus, in particular, cast him in a powerful light-chained rebel whose agony gave birth to enlightenment. The play Prometheus Bound whispered eternal questions into the hearts of its audience. Is knowledge a blessing or a curse? Is suffering the price of progress? And as these ideas flowed into the fabric of the Western world, Prometheus walked silently through the minds of revolutionaries, scientists, poets, and visionaries. In the halls of medieval monasteries, where scribes copied texts by flickering candlelight, the ancient flame lived on. When Galileo dared to look skyward and challenge the heavens, when Newton deciphered the dance of gravity, when Mary Shelley penned Frankenstein, subtitled The Modern Prometheus, the old Titan smiled quietly in the shadows. He had become eternal not through immortality, but through meaning. Yet even meaning evolves. The modern world, drenched in light and wired with signals, may seem far removed from the time of Titans and Olympians. And yet, Prometheus is here too. In the glow of the screen, in the hum of a server farm, in the code of an algorithm, each innovation, each bold reach into the unknown carries a flicker of that original fire. The questions now are different, but the spirit remains. What happens when machines learn to think? When genes are edited and borders dissolve beneath the touch of global networks? Prometheus is no longer just the one who gave fire. He is the one who reminds us of the responsibility that comes with it. For knowledge is not neutral, it burns, and how it is used can either warm or destroy. The same fire that forges tools can level cities. The same insight that cures can also control. Prometheus, were he to speak now, might not warn us against gods, but against forgetting our own limits, against hubris disguised as progress. Yet still, he would not turn away. For his gift was never about safety, it was about potential, and the courage to embrace it, even at great cost. In quieter moments, one might wonder, did Prometheus regret it? The pain, the exile, the endless torment. Was the price too high? But such thoughts fade when we realize that regret was never part of his nature. He saw what humanity could become, not as perfect, but as possible, capable of growth, of wonder, of change. The flame was not meant to give answers, it was meant to ignite questions, to push forward through shadow, even when the path is uncertain. And in every age, when darkness threatened to swallow the light, somewhere remembered him. Not always by name, sometimes in the form of a scientist risking all to expose truth, a writer defying censorship, a protester standing alone with nothing but words, a teacher lighting young minds with ideas. Prometheus walked with them all, quietly, watching, knowing that his legacy was not in the myth, but in the movement, the ongoing journey of thought, courage, and awakening. He does not ask for temples or prayers, only that we never let the flame go out. In the ancient temples of Olympus, where initiates whispered sacred truths beneath the moonlight, there were rumors that Prometheus's story held hidden layers, that the fire he gave was not just the literal blaze of heat and light, but something deeper, a symbol for the spark within, the eternal ember of self-awareness and consciousness. In these quiet sanctuaries, scholars and mystics would speak of inner fire, of divine awakening, of the soul's long journey through ignorance into illumination. And in that way, Prometheus transcended even the realm of myth. He became a spiritual force, a guide not just of intellect, but of soul. The chain that bound him to the rock, they said, was the very chain that binds all beings to their limitations. And his breaking free through pain and sacrifice was the metaphor for inner transformation. Just as the eagle tore at him daily, so too are we torn by our doubts, our fears, our limitations. And just as he endured, so too must we, if we are to rise beyond the base elements of our nature. This deeper understanding would resurface again and again. in the Hermetic texts of Alexandria, in the alchemical symbols of the Middle Ages, in the works of mystics who saw the world as a mirror of the soul. Prometheus, in these visions, was not a rebel against gods alone. He was a liberator of spirit. And the gods he defied, they became symbols of stagnation, of control, of fear, of change. Zeus, with all his power, could not stop the evolution of mind once the flame had been passed. He could punish the body, but he could not unlight the fire. He could chain Prometheus, but he could not silence the idea. And so, the Titan lived on, reshaped by time, retold through the eyes of every generation that needed his story. In revolution, he was the breath before the barricade. In exile, he was the steady heartbeat of hope. In progress, he was the question no one dared to ask, but someone had to. Now, in a world spinning faster than ever before, Prometheus still lingers at the edge of the collective mind. He walks among servers and satellites, in laboratories and lecture halls, wherever minds burn with the need to understand, to change, to light a new way. And though his chains are gone, his burden remains. For with every gift of fire, there comes the test. Will it be used to create or destroy, to liberate or control, to connect or isolate? These are not the gods' questions anymore. They are ours. And Prometheus watches still, not as judge, but as witness, to see what we will do with the flame he gave so long ago. Beneath the stars that once bore witness to his suffering, Prometheus moves silently through the memory of humanity. Though his form may be unseen, his presence is felt in every courageous act, every dangerous idea that dares to unsettle the world. He is the whisper that urges us to look beyond comfort, to question what is handed down as truth, to stretch beyond the safety of tradition into the vast unknown. Long after the fires of Olympus dimmed in mortal memory, his name lived on in symbols and thought. The Renaissance called him back not in chains, but as muse. Artists and thinkers saw in him the spirit of discovery. In Michelangelo's powerful figures, in Da Vinci's notebooks filled with dreams of flying machines and mechanical wonders, Prometheus stirred again. The old fire now burned in ink and invention. And as the Enlightenment dawned, with its clamor for reason and liberty, Prometheus became a guiding star. Thinkers like Voltaire and Goethe reached for his story. Revolutionaries in France and America invoked his defiance. They saw tyranny not in Zeus, but in kings and institutions. And in giving voice to the oppressed, they mirrored the Titan's original act of rebellion. Fire, once a divine secret, became a metaphor for freedom. Mary Shelley, writing by candlelight, in the shadow of volcanic ash and scientific breakthroughs, summoned Prometheus into a new body. In Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, she warned that to play with creation without conscience is to inherit both power and peril. Her creature, stitched from ambition and isolation, longed for what Prometheus had given humanity: connection, compassion, belonging. And through this modern myth, she reminded the world that Prometheus's gift was not simple. It came with responsibility. As the industrial age roared into life, fire became machine. Steam and steel, smoke and speed. The world was changing faster than thought could keep up. And still, Prometheus burned within it. The factory worker, the inventor, the writer shouting into the noise. They were all carrying fragments of the original flame. In a world of engines and empires, the question returned again and again. What do we create when we no longer fear the gods? And now, in the quiet glow of screens, in the hum of artificial minds and synthetic dreams, Prometheus asks again, what are we becoming? The fire is no longer in a fennel stalk. It is in microchips, in neural networks, in nuclear cores. And each day we find new ways to stretch the limits of what it means to be human. The sky, once home only to gods and stars, is crossed by machines bearing our names. The secrets of life are mapped, rewritten, modified, and deep within this dazzling maze of progress, his story remains a compass, not pointing north, but pointing inward. What drives us? Is it fear or hope, ambition or compassion, control or creation? Prometheus gave fire, but he did not give answers. He gave the spark and left it to us to decide how to use it. And that, perhaps, is the deepest truth of all, that the flame he carried was never his to keep. It was a gift meant to be passed forward, from hand to hand, from age to age, not as a torch of conquest, but as a light in the darkness. A small, steady reminder that even in the face of divine command, we can choose to think, to feel, to act. And in every choice, no matter how small, he lives again. In the silence between ancient myths and modern minds, Prometheus endures, not as a fading echo, but as a pulsy constant rhythm beneath the noise of civilization. He is the breath of resistance in a world that often forgets its origin. For even as we build higher and think faster, we still carry the ancient hunger, the desire to understand, to push forward, to reach beyond what is given. Prometheus is not just a symbol for those who create. He is a companion to those who question. When a student wonders why the world works the way it does, when a scientist risks ridicule to challenge a long-held belief, when a philosopher sits in quiet contemplation of suffering and hope, the Titan is there, not with answers, but with presence, a reminder that seeking truth is itself an act of courage. In the myth, he stood against Zeus, but in reality, his defiance was never just about the gods. It was about fear. The fear of change, of freedom, of what might happen if knowledge were allowed to grow without permission. Zeus punished Prometheus, not out of cruelty alone, but because he feared what fire could make of humanity. And that fear still exists today, hidden behind laws, systems, algorithms, always whispering, stay in line, do not ask too much, do not light the flame too high. But the fire does not obey. It lives in the rebel, in the dreamer, in the lonely voice shouting truth into silence. It lives in those who walk away from comfort to find meaning, who break through old walls not to destroy, but to breathe new air. It lives in anyone who chooses the harder path not out of pride, but because something inside will not be still. Prometheus gave us more than warmth. He gave us the courage to shape our world. He gave us the chance to suffer for something greater than ourselves. And in doing so, he showed that divinity is not a gift, but a pursuit, not a destination, but a journey. There are moments when the world seems lost in its own noise, when war and greed drown out the quiet voices, when progress feels like a wheel spinning without direction. In those moments, the story of Prometheus becomes more than myth, it becomes medicine. It reminds us that light, even when small, is never meaningless. That sacrifice, even when forgotten by the world, still matters. And that the highest act of love is to give without reward. For Prometheus was not saved by power or by mercy. He was freed by a human Hercules born of both worlds, divine and mortal. It was not the gods who rescued the Titan. It was one shaped by suffering, one who understood what it meant to live between greatness and pain. This is the promise that Prometheus left behind, that one day, those who carry the fire would also carry the strength to free those who suffer, that those who receive the gift would pass it on, not hoard it, that the light would not be locked away again, but spread until even the darkest corners could begin to see. The mountain still stands where Prometheus was bound. The winds still howl through its crags. The rocks still remember the weight of chains. But they also remember the moment those chains fell. And somewhere, in the flicker of a candle, in the pause before a brave decision, in the trembling hand of someone daring to speak, he lives on. The one who gave fire. The one who changed humanity forever. The fire Prometheus gifted has never truly been extinguished. It dances still in every act of creation, in every word that dares to reshape reality. Across centuries and continents, in every culture that emerged from the dark, the tale of a bringer of light has found fertile ground. Whether known by his name or simply felt in spirit, Prometheus is there, breathing quietly behind every invention, every awakening. From the deserts of the Middle East to the frozen steppes of the North, myths carry echoes of his sacrifice. In some, it is a raven or coyote who steals fire from the gods. In others, a trickster spirit defies the sky beings to bring warmth to earth. Though names and settings change, the soul of the tale is always the same. A divine being breaks the rules to uplift a struggling world, and suffers for it. It is in this repetition that we find something universal, a thread that ties all of humanity together, the understanding that truth is often punished before it is praised, that those who change the world are rarely welcomed by it, and yet they act, not because they seek glory, but because they cannot do otherwise. Prometheus is the embodiment of this. His suffering was not a mistake, it was the price of meaning. The eagle's talons, the grinding of the chains, the lonely wind across the mountain, these were not cruelties alone. They were part of a sacred rhythm. The forging of spirit through fire, not just for himself, but for all those who would follow. And follow they did. The poet scribbling by candlelight, unsure if his words will ever be read. The mathematician charting invisible patterns through the stars. The child in a village asking why the sun rises. All of them touch the same current that once moved through the Titan's soul. Prometheus gave more than survival. He gave hunger, not for food, but for knowledge. A hunger that could never be satisfied, only deepened. And that, more than fire itself, is what made humanity divine. Because fire alone cannot make a civilization. It is the longing behind it, the refusal to accept the world as it is, the belief that something more is possible. And even now, When we live surrounded by lights brighter than ancient stars, the myth remains. Even now, when machines think and data flows through invisible streams, we are still drawn to the primal glow of a flame. We still gather around it, seeking warmth not just for our bodies, but for our minds and hearts. The story of Prometheus reminds us that progress is not clean. It is born in pain, in exile, in defiance, but it is also born in love. For Prometheus did not act out of hatred for the gods. He acted out of love for mortals, for what they could become. And in doing so, he taught us that real power is not in dominion, but in devotion. In giving us fire, he gave us the means to become something more than mere creatures of instinct. He gave us the chance to choose. And though we have stumbled, though we have used the fire to burn, as well as build still, the flame remains. Waiting, flickering, calling us to remember not just who we are, but who we were always meant to be. There are moments in history when humanity teeters on the edge of darkness, when knowledge is threatened, when fear rises higher than hope. In those moments, it is easy to believe that the fire might go out, that the long journey from ignorance to understanding might falter. But it is precisely then that the spirit of Prometheus burns brightest, not in grand gestures, but in small, stubborn acts of light. A forbidden book hidden in a monastery during a time of censorship, a single scientist continuing his work in secret, while empires clash above. A teacher refusing to let ignorance reign in the face of persecution. These are the echoes of the ancient theft of fire. The same defiance, the same love for possibility over obedience. Throughout the centuries, Prometheus's legacy was kept alive by those who chose to build when it was easier to destroy, by those who chose to speak when it was safer to be silent. His flame passed through countless handsome, famous, most forgotten, but each bearer became part of a lineage stretching back to that lonely mountain where a titan once suffered for humanity's future. And it is important to remember that Prometheus's act was not about dominance. It was not the fire of war or conquest he delivered. It was the fire of creativity, of endurance, of wonder. He gave humanity the ability to shape their world, not simply survive it, to dream beyond the immediate needs of the body and ask the eternal questions of the soul. Who are we? Why are we here? What could we become? The myth reminds us that there is danger in this gift. Fire can destroy as easily as it can illuminate. Knowledge, untempered by wisdom, can lead to ruin. But Prometheus did not fear this. He trusted humanity to learn, to stumble and fall, to make mistakes and rise again. He did not expect perfection, only the possibility of greatness born through struggle. And so the flame continues, through every discovery that pushes the horizon back another step, through every voice that challenges injustice, through every hand that lifts another from darkness into light. Today, even as we face challenges undreamed of in the ancient world, climate shifts, artificial intelligence, exploration beyond our own planet, the questions Prometheus raises remain vital. How do we use the gifts we have taken? What responsibilities come with the power we wield? Will we become tyrants or stewards? In this way, Prometheus is not only a figure of the past, he is a warning and a hope for the future. A reminder that the light within us, once ignited, must be tended, fed not only with knowledge, but with compassion, courage, and humility. And in tending that light, we honor the sacrifice of a being who saw potential where others saw only weakness. A being who, despite knowing the cost, chose to love humanity enough to suffer for its future. Prometheus, bound yet unbroken, silent yet speaking still, calling us to remember, to aspire, to create. Through every age, Prometheus has remained an invisible companion to humanity's journey. As cities rose from dust and empires etched their histories into stone, as libraries burned and were rebuilt, as generations forgot and rediscovered ancient truths, the flame he gave flickered steadily onward. It may have dimmed at times, but it was never fully extinguished. When the great library of Alexandria fell to ruin, when knowledge seemed lost to smoke and conquest, still the spark endured, carried across deserts by travelers who memorized forbidden texts, hidden in coded manuscripts, preserved by hands willing to risk everything for wisdom. The fire passed from tongue to tongue, soul to soul, waiting for the right moment to blaze again. And when it did, it came roaring back with a brilliance that shook the very foundations of the world. The Renaissance was more than a rebirth of art and science. It was a reawakening of the spirit Prometheus had ignited. Artists painted the human form not as a shameful vessel, but as a temple worthy of admiration. Scientists peered into the heavens with telescopes, uncovering cosmic symphonies that had been hidden by superstition. Explorers sailed beyond known maps, daring to believe that the world was larger, stranger, more beautiful than anyone had yet dared to imagine. Each of these acts was an extension of the original defiance, the refusal to accept imposed limits on what could be known, created, or dreamed. And yet, with every new blaze of understanding came the shadow of misuse. Wars fought with new weapons, ideologies twisted into chains, knowledge hoarded by those who sought power instead of sharing. Even so, the current of Prometheus remained clear for those willing to see it. It whispered that true greatness was not in domination, but in illumination. Not in hoarding the flame, but in passing it onward. It is no coincidence that in times of tyranny, when rulers have tried to crush thought and rewrite reality, the story of Prometheus found fresh life. In prisons, in secret gatherings, in coded messages and banned books, he was evoked not as a myth to be worshipped, but as a call to action. An assurance that the struggle itself was sacred, that even in chains, truth burns brighter than fear. And so, century after century, the Titan's legacy entwined itself with our own, not in monuments or rituals, but in the endless stubborn insistence that knowledge matters, that creation matters, that hope, even when punished, is stronger than despair. The mountain where Prometheus was bound is long deserted. The gods who once reigned from Olympus have faded into memory, but the fire remains. Not just in the hearths of homes, but in the inner fire of those who choose curiosity over comfort, courage over conformity, love over fear. This is the true temple of Prometheus, not built with marble, but with dreams. And it is everywhere the human heart dares to imagine a brighter world. There is something profoundly human in the story of Prometheus, something that transcends culture, language, and time. It is the recognition that growth often comes at a cost, that wisdom is not granted by divine favor, but earned through pain, questioning, and perseverance. In every era, new Prometheans have risen not born of Titan blood, but of the same fire within. They are the ones who looked at the world and saw not only what was, but what could be, who defied kings and traditions, who spoke truths that others feared to hear, who reached into the unknown with trembling hands and unwavering hearts. Galileo, staring through his telescope and daring to say that Earth was not the center of the universe. Hypatia, teaching philosophy and mathematics in an age that sought to silence her voice. Ada Lovelace, dreaming of machines that could one day think, long before the world was ready to listen. Frederick Douglass, fighting to prove that every human soul carries equal worth, though every chain and law said otherwise. These were Promethean souls, each carrying the burden and the blessing of the fire. And like the Titan, many suffered for their gifts. Some were imprisoned, some exiled, some silenced forever. But none of them, not even in their darkest moments, could truly be defeated. Because once the fire is given, it cannot be taken back. It can be hidden, denied, feared, but it cannot be undone. Every time a voice breaks the silence, every time a hand builds something new from the ashes of the old, every time a mind opens to a greater truth, the flame burns anew. Prometheus teaches us that suffering for a cause does not diminish its worth, that sacrifice, when made for the good of others, transforms pain into meaning. His chains, his torment, his endless defiance, these are not tragedies alone. They are testaments, reminders that real change demands real courage. And that courage is not reserved for titans or heroes. It belongs to each of us. In a quiet decision to stand up for what is right, in the lonely work of creation that no one sees, in the small, stubborn hope that lights a path forward in the darkness. We are all, in our own ways, carriers of the flame. And though the gods of Olympus may be gone, new gods of fear, of power, of complacency rise in their place, challenging the spirit Prometheus gave us. But they too will fall, for the fire is older than they are, older than thrones and empires, older than chains and walls. It burns in the very core of what it means to be human. And it waits, not for permission, but for a willing hand, a brave heart, a mind willing to dream beyond the edges of the known. In the cold silence of space, satellites circle the earth tools forged by human hands, guided by human minds, seeking to understand what once only gods were allowed to know. Telescopes now gaze deeper into the cosmos than any mortal ever dreamed. Probes leave the cradle of Earth, whispering data across the stars. And in each metal casing, in every equation that guided their creation, is the echo of Prometheus's fire. This is not the fire of destruction, but the fire of vision, of the urge to reach not just outward into the heavens, but inward into the mysteries of the self. For what Prometheus gave was not simply knowledge, it was the hunger for it, a hunger that drives us not to settle, but to seek, not to bow to destiny, but to shape it. Even now, as we explore quantum realities, bend light into circuits, and contemplate the coding of life itself, the questions remain the same. What are we doing with the power we have taken from the gods? Do we understand its weight? Do we respect it? Prometheus knew the fire would bring suffering as well as brilliance, that with every act of progress, a shadow would follow. And yet, he gave it anyway, not out of naivety, but because he believed in the possibility of goodness. He believed that even when humanity faltered, it would learn, it would endure, and eventually it would grow into the fire, not be consumed by it. In the laboratories of today's world, this belief is constantly tested. We edit genes, create synthetic organisms, and build machines that learn on their own. We stand at the precipice of questions once thought blasphemous. Can we create consciousness? Can we outgrow death? Can we build a world without gods? And as we stand on that edge, Prometheus is with us, not to lead, not to warn, but to witness. For it is not his place to choose what we become. It is only his legacy to remind us that becoming is our choice to make. This is the deepest truth of the myth, not just that Prometheus gave fire, but that he trusted us with it. He trusted our curiosity, our compassion, our courage. He trusted that even in the face of pain and failure, we would not surrender the light. That we would rise again and again, no matter how many times we fell. And when the fires of our world seem out of control, when innovation outpaces understanding, when power outgrows wisdom, the story of Prometheus becomes not just myth, but mirror, asking us to look at ourselves and remember why the fire was given in the first place. Not to conquer, but to create. Not to rule, but to reveal. In the stillness before a great idea takes form, in the hush that surrounds an artist staring at an empty canvas, or a thinker poised before an impossible question. That's where Prometheus lives now, not as a roaring force, but as a quiet spark, a nudge, a breath in the ear of the imagination. He is not the god of answers. He is the titan of beginnings, of first steps into uncharted territory, of flickers in the dark that dare to become flame. And his chains, though long shattered, still linger in memory as a sacred reminder that every freedom was once a rebellion, that every light was once a theft from the unknown, and that every moment of true creativity is in some way an act of daring. This is why the story of Prometheus refuses to fade. It is not a tale meant for shrines or silent reverence. It is a living current, running through every question that threatens the comfort of the known world. It pulses through the blood of those who will not stop asking, not stop building, not stop imagining. And though we no longer speak his name in temples or offer sacrifice at his altar, we honor him in better ways. When we teach a child to read, and they look at words as if they were magic. When we challenge injustice, even when it costs us peace. When we stay up late to finish a line of code, a melody, a theory, not because we must, but because something inside us demands it. In these moments, we are Prometheus, not in myth, but in action, not in defiance alone, but in devotion to something higher than fear. The gods of the old world demanded worship, demanded obedience, demanded silence. But Prometheus asked for none of that, only that we never stop reaching, only that we remember the value of a mind set free, only that we carry the flame forward not perfectly, not without mistakes, but with care, with courage, with the awareness that even a small light can change everything. And in that awareness, his story lives on not as something finished, but as something still unfolding. In the rhythm of every human generation, there is a quiet passing of fire, not always noticed, rarely celebrated, but vital nonetheless. It happens in whispers, in lullabies, in stories told at the edge of sleep. It happens in classrooms, in libraries, in the silent focus of hands creating something from nothing. The flame of Prometheus does not scream, it glows, steady, patient, waiting to be picked up and carried forward. We often think of fire as explosive, but the fire Prometheus gave is also tender. It lives in memory, in learning, in the simple act of wondering why the world is the way it is. This is how the myth becomes real, not through thunder or divine wrath, but through human hands shaping the future every hour, every day. There's a quiet truth hidden inside his story that is easy to overlook. Prometheus did not act out of revenge. He wasn't driven by pride, nor did he seek to overthrow the gods. His crime, if we can call it that, was love. A love so complete, so selfless, that he endured an eternity of suffering for the chance that others might one day thrive. That kind of love, unconditional, visionarious, one of the rarest fires of all. And it is not gone. It flickers in those who care for others with no promise of reward, in those who speak truth, though it costs them everything, in those who teach, who heal, who build without glory, the ones who plant trees under whose shade they may never sit. They are Prometheus, reborn not in legend, but in flesh and breath. And though the chains of the past were forged in myth, today's chains are just as real. They are made of silence, of apathy, of fear disguised as practicality. And still the fire fights to break through, to remind us that we are not only capable of change, we are responsible for it. To carry the flame is to resist the weight of these chains. It means saying, there is more than this, even when the world has forgotten how to listen. It means believing that light belongs to all, not just the few. Prometheus gave humanity the ability to shape its own destiny, and in doing so, he gave up the right to shape it for us. He stepped back, not in abandonment, but in trust. Trusting that we would learn, would stumble, and still rise again. That trust is a sacred thing. And every time we use the fire to build something new, to lift someone higher, to imagine something better, we honor it. The myth is not a relic. It is a mirror. And the question it asks remains the same across the ages. The world today hums with 1,000 fires, glowing screens, electric cities, servers humming in the dark like digital hearths. We are surrounded by the gifts Prometheus once gave: tools of knowledge, engines of creation, connections that reach across oceans and minds. And yet, with all this light, we still struggle in the shadows. Isolation, division, distraction. The fire burns bright, but sometimes it burns alone, without direction, without care. And that is when the story of Prometheus becomes most vital, not as inspiration, but as a compass. He reminds us that fire, left untended, can consume, that knowledge without wisdom can become its own kind of blindness, that power without purpose can drift into destruction. But he also reminds us that we are never powerless, that no matter how dark the night becomes, we have the ability to relight the flame, not by waiting for gods or heroes, but by choosing to act right here, in our own time, in our own way. Prometheus was a titan, but he never lorded over humanity. He walked among them. He taught them quietly, humbly, believing not in domination, but in potential. He believed that a single flame could light a world. And it has. That is why his story endures not, because it is old, but because it is still happening in every choice we make to learn, to teach, to care, to imagine. In every moment when someone chooses to bring light where there was none. In that moment, the chains fall away, and Prometheus, though long freed, walks beside us once again, not as a figure of myth, but as a presence within. As long as there is fire, there is hope. And as long as there is hope, there will always be those who dare to pass it on. There are few myths that live in the bloodstream of our species as deeply as that of Prometheus. It survives not because of temples, not because of carved inscriptions or golden statues, but because it speaks to something central within us, something older than language. The yearning to know, to understand, to become more than we are. Prometheus is not the god of fire, he is the god of becoming. And this is why his tale has echoed through every generation, not just as a story to be told, but as a question to be answered. Are we brave enough to carry what he gave us? Are we willing to bear the burden of thought, of choice, of freedom? For the fire he delivered was never just heat or light. It was responsibility. It was the weight of knowing, and the challenge of acting with that knowledge. From the moment mortals first gathered around that ancient flame, everything began to change. Their lives were no longer bound by the seasons or by instinct. They began to shape the land, shape their tools, shape their stories, and eventually, they began to shape themselves. They formed societies, created laws, built cities from stone and song. They wrote poems and philosophies, questioned the stars, mapped the heavens, and imagined gods beyond even those they had once feared. All of it, from the first shelter to the farthest satellite, from the first question to the deepest meditation, none of it would have happened without that first defiant gift. And yet Prometheus never asked for praise, never sought to rule over those he helped. He didn't demand devotion. He simply gave and endured. In this way, he teaches something few gods ever have: the value of silent service, the power of sacrifice made not for glory, but for love. And perhaps that is why his punishment, harsh though it was, became part of his greatness, for it showed that even when truth is punished, it is not erased, that even when light is chained, it can never truly be extinguished. That is a lesson we carry with us even now. In every place where truth is hidden, where justice is silenced, where minds are chained by fear, Prometheus is felt not as a savior from the outside, but as a stirring from within, a flicker in the soul that says, "No more darkness. I choose the flame." There is a quiet revolution that occurs each time someone dares to imagine a different future, not one dictated by the past or ruled by inherited fear, but one built from the raw material of hope. And in every one of those moments, whether in solitude or defiance, Prometheus stands near. He is the whisper behind the thinker who refuses to accept the obvious. He is the hand behind the artist who paints what cannot yet be seen. He is the steady breath of the inventor who shapes possibility out of wire and spark. Not to control, but to contribute. Not to lead, but to light the way. His presence is not loud. It doesn't demand obedience or belief. It simply waits for those who are willing to step into the unknown, even when the cost is high. Because Prometheus knows perhaps better than any god or mortal that all true progress begins in isolation. All true awakening begins in discomfort. That is the price of the fire. It is not ease, but clarity, not peace, but vision. And vision, once ignited, cannot be forgotten, even when turned away, even when punished, even when mocked or misunderstood. It lingers, glowing, waiting. That is the power of the flame, not to destroy, but to endure, even when buried, even when hidden, even when denied. The world may forget the details of his myth, but it will never forget the shape of the idea he gave us, that we are not bound by fate, that we are not limited by what the gods decree, that we are, if we choose to be, makers of our own meaning, and that, in the smallest light, there is the beginning of a new world. Prometheus knew this. He believed in it so deeply, he was willing to suffer for eternity just to give us the chance. And now, the question is not what he gave. The question is, what will we do with it? The fire Prometheus gave humanity was not a single act frozen in time. It was a beginning. The light he placed into mortal hands was not the end of a story, it was the spark of one. And that story, still unfolding, continues in quiet revolutions, in unseen breakthroughs, in the invisible yet unstoppable expansion of thought. He did not force enlightenment, he offered a key. And what humanity chose to do with that key has written every chapter of its journey since. Some chapters are written in golden letters, moments of beauty, of courage, of discovery. Others are darker, written in smoke and ruin, when the fire was used not to warm, but to burn. But in all of them, the flame persists. And so too does the hope that we are learning, changing, becoming more than we were yesterday. Prometheus was a rebel, yes, but he was also a believer. Not in gods, but in people, in their capacity to grow, to reflect, to rise. He saw that within every human was a mirror of the divino as power, but as potential. And that belief, more than the fire itself, was his true gift. In modern times, we often forget the weight of our inheritance. We live surrounded by light, by knowledge, by access to more information than any age before us. And yet the questions remain echoing like they did in caves and temples, in palaces and laboratories. What is our purpose? What do we owe one another? What do we do with what we've been given? These questions have no single answer. They were never meant to. But Prometheus reminds us that it's not the answers that define you, it's the asking, the seeking, the refusal to accept darkness when a light can still be kindled. Every generation faces its own shadows. and every generation must decide whether to guard the flame, to pass it on, or to let it die. That choice is never easy, but it is always ours. And in that choice, we meet Prometheus not as myth, but as mirror. There's a stillness that comes just before the fire catches, a pause in the air, a quiet readiness. It's the moment between thought and action, between inspiration and reality. And in that space lives the essence of what Prometheus gave. Not just the flame, but the courage to strike it. This is why his story endures not as a tale of rebellion alone, but as one of transformation. He transformed himself from titan to teacher, from prisoner to symbol. And in doing so, he offered a blueprint for what it means to be truly human. To face suffering not as an end, but as part of the journey. To defy limitation, not for pride, but for love. To trust that even in the coldest dark, one spark can lead to something greater. And so we carry him not in chains, but in choices. In every decision to create instead of destroy, to teach instead of silence, to care instead of turn away. The world still has its Zeuses, figures of power who fear what light can do, who try to keep knowledge locked behind gates, who punish those who question, who chain those who reveal. But the fire is no longer kept on Olympus. It's in the libraries, the classrooms, the devices that fit in our palms. It's in the words we share, the ideas we carry, the hopes we dare to speak aloud. It's in us. Prometheus gave the fire, but it is humanity that must keep it alive. Not through grand gestures, but through quiet devotion, through the steady, relentless work of building, understanding, healing. The story has never really ended. It changes form, finds new voices, wears new faces, but the core remains the same. A gift given at great cost, and the sacred question it leaves behind. What will you make with the fire? The power of the Prometheus myth lies not in the spectacle of gods or the drama of punishment, but in its quiet truth, that progress is born not from permission, but from persistence. Not from divine command, but from human will. In every corner of history, where minds awakened and hearts opened, the fire has been there. Not blazing in glory, but glowing with purpose. It has moved silently through generations, passed from teacher to student, from parent to child, from stranger to stranger, in acts of compassion, in shared knowledge, in defiant hope. Prometheus gave the world something greater than light, gave it continuity, a thread of courage that stretches through time, weaving through all those who dare to imagine more. Even now, in a world often overwhelmed by its own complexity, the flame burns. It burns in the quiet laboratories where researchers seek cures not for profit, but for people. In classrooms where young minds are lit with wonder instead of fear. In the artists who still believe that beauty has the power to heal. And it burns too, in defiance, in protest, in resistance. Wherever people say no to ignorance, to injustice, to oppression, the Prometheian spirit lives on. His story reminds us that suffering is not always a sign of failure. That struggle, when chosen in service of others, becomes sacred. That even when the world turns away, when the gods seem silent, the act of giving still matters. Because what Prometheus gave was not just fire. He gave us to ourselves. He believed that we could learn, could grow, could find our way not because we were flawless, but because we were capable. Capable of learning from the past. Capable of creating something better. Capable of becoming more than our circumstances. That faith, more than any punishment, more than any rebellion, defines his legacy. And it leaves us with the same question, echoing softly but persistently through time. Now that we have the fire, what kind of world will we build? When we look up at the stars today, no longer with fear, but with instruments and questions, there is a quiet triumph in it. A long echo from that first moment Prometheus carried fire down the slopes of Olympus and placed it into the trembling hands of humanity. That moment was not about conquest. It was about potential. A moment when a Titan saw in mortals something worth suffering for and chose to give them the tools to rise. The tools to think, to feel, to wonder, to change. It's easy to forget, in the blur of progress, that all of this, every invention, every poem, every act of kindness, began with that spark. A single decision made in love, not fear. In hope, not obedience. Prometheus could have chosen silence. He could have stood aside and let the gods keep their order. Let humanity stumble in darkness. But he chose instead to believe in something fragile and unfinished. He chose to act, not for power, but for possibility. And so we are here, shaped not just by what we've inherited, but by what we dare to create. His myth is not a cautionary tale, it is a challenge to use what we've been given, to keep asking, to keep reaching, to hold the fire not as a weapon, but as a promise that we will not stop learning, that we will not stop imagining, that we will not give in to the easy silence of obedience when truth asks for our voice. In the story of Prometheus, there is pain, but there is also purpose. And that purpose is what turns myth into meaning, what turns flame into future. In every age, there are those who stand at the edge of the unknown, looking not for certainty, but for the chance to understand what lies beyond. They are the descendants of Prometheus not by blood, but by spirit. They walk paths that have never been walked before. They ask questions no one else dares to ask. And they carry the flame forward, not to preserve it, but to transform it. Because that is the true nature of fire. It changes. It reshapes what it touches. It turns the ordinary into something new, wood into ash, sand into glass, silence into song. Prometheus did not give humanity something static. He gave something alive, something wild, something sacred. And so the fire must not only be protected, it must be used. Used to light the way through fear. Used to burn away lies. Used to warm those left in the cold. This is why the story of Prometheus resonates with those who resist, with those who teach, with those who refuse to believe that things must remain as they are. He is not the symbol of safe progress. He is the symbol of dangerous hope, of the belief that the world can be more than it is, even when that belief is punished, even when it comes at a cost. And it always comes at a cost. To carry the fire is to accept that you will sometimes walk alone, that you will be misunderstood, that you may be bound for daring to unbind others. But Prometheus teaches that the cost is not too high, that the suffering is not the end of the story, that even if you are chained, your fire can still burn, that even if you are silenced, your light can still spread. Because the gods could chain his body, but they could not chain the idea. And once an idea is lit with fire, it cannot be unlit. When Hercules arrived at the mountain and shattered the chains, he did more than free a titan. He fulfilled a prophecy older than Olympus itself, that one day, strength born of both mortal pain and divine power would bring justice to the unjust, light to the forgotten, and release to the one who had endured. But that act of liberation was never the end of the myth. It was only the beginning of its next form. Prometheus did not return to rule. He did not seek vengeance against Zeus or rise to claim a throne. Instead, he returned to silence, to watching, to walking the world not as a god, but as a presence, a reminder. Because the truth is, the flame was never his to control, only to give. And once given, it belongs to all of us. It belongs to the scientist alone in a lab at midnight, staring into the patterns of life. It belongs to the mother telling stories to her children, teaching them to dream. It belongs to the rebel standing before injustice, unshaken even as the winds howl around them. It belongs to the quiet souls who carry light into dark places, not because they are asked to, but because they must. They are the living continuation of the Prometheian legacy, not in myth, but in motion. And so the fire spreads, not in great explosions, but in steady sparks, not in temples, but in moments. Each time we choose to act from knowledge instead of fear. Each time we choose compassion over control. Each time we choose to build rather than break. We write another line in the eternal story of the fire. And Prometheus, though far from Olympus, walks with us still, watching, waiting, trusting that we remembered not just what he gave, but why. The world has never been short of fire. What has always been in question is how we use it. Prometheus did not give us a completed world, he gave us the means to create it, to shape it by our choices, to test its boundaries with our thoughts, to fill its empty spaces with the heat of human will. And yet, as powerful as the gift was, it came with no instruction, no law carved in stone, no voice from the sky warning us what to do next. Only silence and possibility. This is the great paradox of the Prometheian gift, that it was at once the ultimate blessing and the heaviest burden. The fire made us free, but it did not tell us what to do with that freedom. It simply gave us the right to decide. And so every age has faced the same truth. That fire in itself is not enough. It must be shaped by the soul that carries it. And so much depends on who we choose to become in the light of our own creations. Will we be kind? Will we be just? Will we remember the pain that came before us? Or will we forget and let the fire blind us instead of guide us? These questions are not answered in myth, they are answered in life. In the quiet moments of decision, in the loud moments of revolt, in the tender moments of connection. Prometheus gave us fire. Yes, but more than that, he gave us the future, not as something to be received, but something to be made. And in that act, he placed a sacred trust into human hands. The trust that we would not let it die. The trust that we would protect it, share it, grow it, and that we would never again allow it to be taken from those who need it most. This is the core of the myth. Not punishment, not theft, but love. A love so deep it endured the rage of the gods. A love so quiet it asked for nothing in return, only that we carry it forward. And we have. Though the world is fractured and uncertain, though fear still rises and old chains still echo in new forms, the fire lives. It lives in the minds that won't stop wondering, in the voices that won't stop singing, in the hands that won't stop building. It lives in the simple, powerful choice to keep going, to question one more time, to light one more candle, to offer one more hand in the darkness. This is where the Prometheian legacy breathes now, not in legends, but in lives. In those who speak truth to power, even when the world would rather remain asleep. In those who stand beside the outcast, the unheard, the forgotten, because they remember what it is like to be left in the cold. In those who risk, not for wealth, not for fame, but for the joy of giving light where there was none. They are the new flame bearers, and they are everywhere. They do not wear laurels or carry swords. They carry books, ideas, questions. They carry the old fire in new forms. And though they may not know his name, they walk the same path as Prometheus. For in the end, the myth was never about gods and punishment. It was always about what we could become, what we still can become, so long as we do not forget that the flame is ours now, ours to tend, ours to trust, ours to share. And in every act that keeps it alive, he lives again. The ancient myth of Prometheus was never just about defiance. It was a story of devotion, a devotion so deep that it transcended fear, surpassed punishment, and endured through the ages not by might, but by meaning. In that sacred moment, when the fire passed from divine hands to human ones, something irreversible occurred. Humanity was no longer merely part of the world. It was now capable of shaping it. This was the secret the gods feared. Not that humans would become gods, but that they would no longer need them. For in the glow of the flame, people began to see with new eyes. They began to question, to dream, to create symbols and songs, to honor not just the heavens but the possibilities within themselves. And that is the quiet revolution at the heart of Prometheus's tale, not of rebellion against power, but of awakening to one's own. And with awakening came the burden of choice. No longer could we live only by instinct. No longer could we wait for guidance from above. The fire made us free, but it also made us responsible. That responsibility echoes still. It echoes in every courtroom where justice is weighed, in every laboratory where ethics are questioned, in every conversation where we ask, "Is this right?" instead of, "Is this allowed?" It echoes in every child who wonders why the sky is blue, every protester who asks why the world remains unequal, every teacher who sees a spark in a young face and decides not to let it fade. This is how the myth survives. not carved in stone, but carved in conscience. Prometheus is not a character of the past. He is a force within the present. And though the world is louder now, more crowded, more frantic, the fire remains the same. It needs no temple, only a hand to carry it, a heart to protect it, a voice to keep its story alive. There is something timeless in the way fire moves, the way it flickers and breathes, the way it dances without fear. It is never still, never settled, always reaching, always consuming, transforming, revealing. And perhaps that is why Prometheus chose it. Not just for its warmth, or its light, or its power, but for what it represented: change. And with change comes risk. There is always a cost to growth, a pain to progress. But Prometheus accepted that cost, so that we might rise beyond the limits set for us. And in return, we too must accept that cost if we wish to keep the flame alive. We must accept that learning can be uncomfortable, that truth can be dangerous, that freedom is not easy, is effort. It is the quiet discipline of asking again and again, what more can we become? Because the fire is not just about power, it is about becoming, about burning away what no longer serves, about lighting the way toward what might be possible, even if no one else sees it yet. This is why those who walk the Prometheian path often walk alone, not because they wish to, but because they must go where others will not. Into the dark, into the silence, into the unknown, not to conquer it, but to carry the flame into it, so that others might follow, so that others might see, and though they may be mocked, may be chained, may be forgotten, the fire they carry will outlast them. It will find new hands, new hearts, new questions, and it will burn still, because that is the legacy of Prometheus. Not a single act, but a living, eternal light. The image of Prometheus bound his body twisted against the cold rock. The eagle descending each day is burned into myth, not simply as a tale of punishment, but as a meditation on endurance. For unlike other gods and heroes whose trials lasted days or years, Prometheus's suffering spanned ages, an unending loop of agony that could not kill him, only test him. But what was being tested wasn't his strength. It was his resolve. The same resolve found in those who suffer for their ideals, who are cast out for telling truths no one wants to hear. Whistleblowers, dissidents, visionaries, poets. Not all endure with grace, but all endure with purpose. Prometheus stands among them, not as a mythological figure frozen in stone, but as a symbol of the one who holds the fire even when the world tells them to drop it. It would have been easier to stay silent, to walk among the gods, distant and untouched. But he chose the difficult path, the one where love outweighs self-preservation, where belief in others is worth more than safety. And that is why his myth survives in so many forms, why it has been reimagined in literature, in science, in art. In every age, someone rediscovers him not as an old legend, but as a living reminder that suffering for the sake of awakening is not in vain, that the flame may be painful to carry, but it's far more painful to live without it. So we tell his story not because it entertains us, but because it strengthens us. Because somewhere, deep in our own spirit, we too are bound by fear, by doubt, by the limits placed upon us. And in hearing of the one who endured his mountain, we begin to believe that we can endure ours. We begin to believe that we too can carry fire, and that we must. And as the ages pass, the mountain fades. The eagle becomes a symbol more than a sentence. And the name Prometheus loses none of its gravity, because it no longer belongs only to him. It belongs to every soul who dares to give, to every heart that chooses risk over comfort, to every voice that speaks light into darkness, knowing it might never be thanked, never be remembered and continued. For this is the truth of the Prometheian legacy, that it is not measured in monuments, but in momentum, in what it sets into motion. The fire Prometheus gave has outlived gods, outlived empires, outlived the very myths that first told of it. It lives on in the flame of human will, in the aching, sacred refusal to give up on each other, in the decision again and again to teach, to heal, to hope. Because even now, with all we have built, the world still needs its firebearers, not just the ones who invent or rebel or lead, but the ones who quietly keep the flame alive in places no one sees. The nurse at the end of a long shift, the scientist peering into cells, believing answers are there, the child dreaming of a world that has never yet existed. These are the Prometheians of our time, and they are everywhere, unchained, but carrying the same light, not to defy the gods, but to fulfill the gift, to honor the trust, to answer, in their own way, the question Prometheus once asked in silence as he bled beneath the sky. Will you remember why I gave this to you? There is a quiet place within every person where the fire rests, not always visible, not always bright, but always present. It waits in the stillness between thoughts, in the pause before courage takes form, in the hush that follows grief, when something inside chooses to rise instead of surrender. That fire is the gift of Prometheus, not just as a symbol of invention or knowledge, but as a reflection of the sacred within human resilience. It lives not only in great acts, but in small ones, in the whisper of a kind word offered when the world seems harsh, in the decision to try again when failure weighs heavy, in the breath of patience in the face of anger, or the choice to listen when it's easier to turn away. Prometheus gave humanity the power to shape the external world, but he also awakened something inward, a mirror to the divine, not in thunder and lightning, but in empathy, in memory, in meaning. And that perhaps is the deepest reason his story endures. Because fire alone could not change the world. It needed hearts to carry it, hands to pass it on, souls to protect it, even in silence. This is the fire we speak of when we say someone has spirit, or when we talk of a light in their eyes. It is something that cannot be taught, only tended. Prometheus's flame is not bound by history. It moves through time as memory wrapped in action, as inspiration hidden in ordinary moments, as endurance wrapped in humility. And it comes to life again every time someone chooses to believe in a better world, not in fantasy, but in effort. Because the fire does not promise ease, only the chance to become something more, to choose love over indifference, vision over obedience, and meaning over comfort. And though the Titan's body may have healed, his message never stopped burning. It flows through us still, a silent companion, asking not that we be perfect, only that we be awake. In the oldest stories, the gods demand tribute. They ask for worship, for fear, for control. But Prometheus asked for none of that. He gave freely, not to elevate himself, but to elevate others. He did not want to be followed. He wanted humanity to walk forward on its own. That is the essence of his rebellion, not against Zeus alone, but against the very structure of dependency. He gave humanity the means to be their own authors, their own guides, their own gods, not in power, but in creation. To hold the fire is to accept that we are no longer waiting to be saved. We are already carrying the light that can lead us forward. And that means we must take responsibility for the path. Prometheus's story tells us that freedom comes with fire, and fire comes with risk, but also that the risk is worth it. He teaches that the pain of becoming is more meaningful than the comfort of remaining the same, and that love, when paired with sacrifice, becomes something eternal. Even now, when myths are often dismissed as mere fables, his story resists fading because it is not built on superstition. It is built on truth woven into the deepest parts of what it means to be human. Every artist who creates without knowing if their work will be understood, every builder who lays the foundation for a future they may never see, every person who chooses to speak light into darkness, even when the darkness seems endless, they are Prometheus in motion, not as legend, but as living echo. And with each generation, the flame continues reborn in new voices, new forms, new hope, because the question Prometheus asked was never just about gods or fire. It was about belief, not belief in the heavens, but belief in us. There is a moment that comes to every person who carries the fire, a moment of silence where doubt enters like wind through a crack in the wall. When the world seems heavy, progress feels slow, and the flame flickers low. It is in these moments when the dark presses closest that Prometheus becomes more than a myth. He becomes the reminder that fire endures, that light returns, that even if you are alone, even if you are tired, the flame still matters. Because Prometheus was not saved by gods. He was freed by action, by a mortal with strength born from struggle, by the same kind of soul who faces hardship not with despair, but with motion. And that moment Hercules breaking the chains is not just a mythic climax. It is a promise that no matter how long the darkness lasts, there is always a hand that will come. There is always someone else carrying the flame. And sometimes, that someone is you. We do not carry the fire for applause. We carry it because it is right, because it is needed, because somewhere, someone else is still stumbling in the cold. And the fire does not just light their path, it reminds them they are not alone. This is how change moves through the world, not with shouts, but with sparks, with ordinary people choosing, again and again, to lift the flame when it would be easier to let it fall. This is how Prometheus lives on, not on pedestals, but in persistence, not in heaven, but in human hearts. Each of us is offered the chance to carry the fire, and the only question is whether we will hold it high or hide it. The fire of Prometheus burns brightest in the places where silence once ruled, in the broken streets where children now learn, in the quiet corners of the world where people create despite being told not to, in the hands of those who choose peace when the world demands vengeance. It is not always dramatic. Often, it is small, fragile, nearly invisible. But it is there, in the choice to forgive, in the courage to speak, in the will to begin. And wherever that fire lives, so too lives the spirit of the Titan who believed we were worth the gift, not because we were perfect, but because we had the power to change. That power still exists. It lives in every question asked honestly, in every attempt to reach across what divides us, in every act of imagination, no matter how humble. Prometheus gave us fire, but he also gave us each other, because no one carries the flame alone forever. Sometimes we pass it, sometimes we shield it for someone else, and sometimes we carry it together. That is what makes it eternal, not the fact that it was stolen from the gods, but that it was shared between mortals. The story does not end with his punishment, nor with his rescue. It ends every time someone lights a fire in the dark, and it begins again each time we decide to keep it burning. There is something sacred about endings, not because they are final, but because they invite reflection. And as we near the close of Prometheus' story, we realize it has never truly been about him alone. It has always been about us, about what we choose to do with what we've been given, about how we carry the burden and the blessing of knowledge, of freedom, of fire. For though the myth began in the heights of Olympus and the depths of divine wrath, it ends in something much quieter, a whisper carried through time, a memory etched not in marble, but in action, in courage, in care. Prometheus' sacrifice was not just an act of defiance, it was an act of faith. Faith that we would not waste the gift, that we would not let fear triumph over thought, that we would not forget that true power lies not in domination, but in understanding, and that real fire burns not in temples, but in the minds and hearts of those who keep asking, who keep imagining, who keep believing in a world that can be more than what it is. Even now, as the world grows louder and more complex, the core truth of the myth remains clear. It reminds us that progress is not made only by those with influence or titles or strength. It is made by those who care, by those who act, by those who, like Prometheus, choose to serve rather than rule, to give rather than take. This is how the fire moves forward. This is how it endures, not through monuments, but through moments. And in each of those moments, we carry him with us. So if you ever feel small in the face of vastness, if you ever wonder whether your choices matter, if you ever question whether the flame you carry makes a difference, remember this: the fire you hold is ancient. It is burned through myths, through revolutions, through generations of quiet, determined souls. It has survived storms, silences, and the weight of forgetting. And now it is in your hands. You do not need to be a hero. You do not need to be remembered. You only need to keep the flame alive in whatever way is true to you. That may mean creating, or protecting, or teaching, or listening. It may mean simply refusing to give up on the idea that humanity, though flawed, is worth the effort. Prometheus believed that, and because he did, we exist in a world shaped by light rather than shadow. A world where fire warms our homes, where ideas travel across oceans, where questions are still being asked and answers still being sought. You are part of that story now. And long after your voice is quieted, your fire may still burn in someone else's hands. That is the legacy. That is the myth. And that is the gift. Prometheus gave us fire, and in choosing to carry it, we become the ones who change the world forever. And so, the story returns to silence. The fire still burns, not on mountaintops or in the halls of the gods, but in you. Prometheus gave a gift not meant to be admired, but to be carried. Not for worship, but for wonder. And as you rest now, drifting through the soft space between sleep and dream, know that you are part of that story, a quiet bearer of light in a world that sometimes forgets how much it needs it. Let the flame rest within you, calm, steady, safe. Let your breath slow, your body soften. The journey has been long, but you are home now. Good night, and may your dreams carry the warmth of the fire. Always.